Ty Godwin from SeekingBostonMarathon.com and the Butterfly Pavilion Podcast. To say we're excited is an understatement. Recently, I watched the Peyton and Eli Manning Manning cast or simulcast on Monday Night Football, and they've got a white whales list. People including the Pope and George Bush. They actually got George Bush on Monday Night Football. We have our own white whale list, and at the top of that list is this week's guest, and that is Akiko Iwasaki, who is a professor from Yale Immunobiology. She was recently Forbes 50 over 50. She's Time Magazine's 100 most influential. Again, my superhero, and most recently was awarded the Keio Award in Science. So we're happy to have Akiko join us.
Recording. So we are on.
Excellent. Well, I can't begin to describe the excitement that we have here on the Butterfly Pavilion podcast to have Akiko Iwasaki from Yale University on our podcast. Akiko is, and of course, as usual, I've got my co-host, Nikki Godwin.
Hello, everyone.
And do I have that right? You might be the first female recipient of that award, Akiko?
Oh, I was the first female Japanese recipient.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And aside from all those accreditations, she's also one of my Seeking Boston's long COVID superheroes. So I've long been a fan. We're very excited about this. Long COVID is a complex topic that she covered in her symposium in New Mexico over 4 days. We're going to try and cover it in 1 hour. So we'll try and speed this thing along. We've got some great questions. First off, Akiko, do you prefer to be referred to as doctor or Akiko or professor?
Oh, no, just call me Akiko, please.
Okay. Kind of like Cher. One word. Very, very famous in her circles. So we'll go with Akiko. So we are in the holiday season. I think Nikki's going to kick us off with kind of a holiday centric question for you.
Awesome. Thanks for that awesome introduction, Dad. And again, Akiko, we're so excited to have you, and thank you so much for your time and for joining us today. But as Dad mentioned, we are in the swing of the holiday season, and that comes with a lot of gatherings and conversations at the holiday dinner table. And we'd love to hear from your perspective, how would we explain long COVID to someone who may be either not educated in the subject or consciously skeptical or dismissive of long COVID?
Yeah. So that's a very good question because believe it or not, there are people who haven't even heard of long COVID. And this is a disease that impacts millions of people, and yet the recognition is much less than the severe COVID. So this is a typical thing that might come up during a dinner conversation. And what I would say is that, globally speaking, there are estimated to be 400 million people that have been impacted with long COVID so far. And the fact that roughly 10% of the people who get COVID will go on to develop long COVID. And it can impact anyone of any age, infants to elderly. But this is a disease that impacts women more than men. And there are over 200 symptoms that are reported for these conditions, but it's also maybe important to point out that COVID is not unique in developing these sort of post-acute phase of disease, and that these post-acute infection syndromes have been seen throughout the history for centuries. Likely, people have suffered from these conditions without really having a name associated with them. Mm-hmm. So I would, point out that this is now no longer a question. That long COVID is a real disease, and we are seeing a lot of different changes in the immunological and metabolic markers in patients with long COVID, and it's something to be taken seriously.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow, I have already learned so much in just our few minutes chatting. I mean, I obviously know a lot about long COVID through my dad, but I didn't realize that women were more affected.
Mhm.
But also the amount of people that are impacted by this disease. So I think, really hitting people in these discussions with facts, and that it should be taken seriously is a great way to handle that conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you hit on something. First, I should mention, some people from my podcast know me as having stage 4 cancer, and I've actually will have my 6-year anniversary for having long COVID myself. Just as point of reference, how it can affect an individual, before cancer, I went to within a matter of 45 days. I was a very active marathon runner, and within 45 days, I couldn't run. In 2020, I had a 100-day fever.
Mm.
I've never had a fever. I don't know if anybody that's had a fever for more than 48 to 72 hours. This was 100 degrees over 100 days.
Mm.
Then that spun into mitochondria damage, endothelial damage, vasculitis, blood clots, cognitive issues, um, uh, inflammation,
Mhm.
a broken immune system. So I think I check a lot of the boxes for someone with long COVID. Akiko, you mentioned uh, post acute, and uh, it has some debate in the community. Um, when I first was diagnosed with long COVID at Mayo Clinic, he referred to as post acute, and some people prefer viral persistence. Do
Mm.
you waffle between the two of post viral or viral persistence, or what's your stance on that?
Yeah, I certainly think that there is a significant proportion of people with long COVID that have so signatures of viral persistence. However, we also see many other drivers of disease that may not require persistent virus replication. For instance, autoimmune diseases that are triggered as a result of the acute phase of infection doesn't necessarily require persistent virus to trigger and maintain these types of conditions. So, that is the reason why we're calling these conglomerate of diseases post-acute infection syndromes, because we don't really quite understand what is driving the disease. And one of those features will very likely include persistent virus, but there are other ways to get there as well. So it's a little premature to call it viral persistence disease when we have evidence for some people otherwise.
Yeah. So Dr. Vinishka Korn at Mayo, um, to echo what you said, and it's not new. Is that a fair statement? Because we've had other. I've heard of people that even had the flu that then go on to develop long term damage and issues.
Yeah, absolutely. So these, diseases collectively we're calling post-acute infection syndromes include, anything from Ebola virus, polio, EBV, SARS-CoV-2, influenza. And if you look at the history of documentations of these diseases, you'll note that every time there's a pandemic or large epidemic that happens, there are reports of people who are just failing to recover. And that can manifest in different forms, but, chronic fatigue and post exertional malaise and cognitive issues, pain, sensory issues, these are typically reported after every pandemic. So, in a way, like if you learn from the history, this long COVID is not a surprise that we're dealing with this. But unfortunate thing is that until now, very little attention has been paid to post-acute infection syndromes in general, including ME/CFS. So we didn't have the tools to kind of immediately start diagnosing and treating patients, which we really need to be able to do for the next pandemic.
Um,
I think that,
so
sorry to jump in, Dad.
yeah, Nikki, go ahead.
I think that just reminds me of, you know, we if we don't pay attention to our history, it will repeat itself.
Hmm.
And so from someone who's not in the healthcare field whatsoever, I recognize that it is important to evaluate what has been done in the past and ensure that we're learning from the past pandemics,
Hmm.
which I think people can forget sometimes.
Very easily forget.
Mhm.
Right,
Oh,
right. I should point out my co-host prior to this, she's like, "Why, what can I offer to this? I'm going in front of a world expert on long COVID." I think the three of us have a unique blend. You're obviously the expert. I'm an expert as someone having long COVID. Nikki's an expert in that she is a family member that can notice when dad has a severe flare up on a given day. So we all bring our expertise. I want to move on to it's a unique climate, and I'm not gonna pin you down into politics, but we can't avoid it in that this year there have been uh, quite a change in funding dynamics, is a polite way of putting it. University research has been capped at 15%. The National Cancer Institute's budget has been cut by 40%. Um, a WAPO last week summarized that there's, I believe, 383 trials affecting 74,000 patients in all areas of research. Um, how is that? How do you see the landscape changing given those challenges? It's kind of a loaded question, as I see potentially private research having to step up. But what's your take on, um, that landscape?
yeah, I am concerned that the United States position in science and clinical medicine um, will suffer as a result of the cutbacks in funding and continued clinical trials. And that will set us back in terms of progress and leadership. And I feel that, these are trying times for many people. I mean, I consider myself lucky that, our grants have not been directly impacted, but many of my colleagues in especially other institutions have been dealing with the aftermath. So I think this is, hopefully something will change in the future to enable us to continue both the basic research and the clinical trials that are really needed to bring better medicines to people. Um, and, I also want to highlight the advocacy of patient groups that have enabled us to continue. Part of the reason that our grants weren't cut is because the patient advocate groups spoke up and ensured that the funding for long COVID continues. So, I'm just so grateful that I'm part of this group where we're very much supported by the patients.
Yes, well, and I think the challenges will continue. And like I said, I think uh, uh, they may require some deep pockets of private industry. Um, but anyway, moving on, you touched on earlier that there's long COVID is kind of a heterogeneous thing. It's not. It's hard sometimes to simplify what long COVID is because, as you mentioned, there's like over 200 symptoms. I know you've talked before about how you categorize because then that would also presume lead to therapeutics and down the road as we treat this or
Mhm.
hopefully find treatments. Um, can you speak to the breadth of symptoms and do they fall in buckets or because it seems that there's commonality but yet it affects people differently.
Yes, so there are a few different ways to kind of tackle the heterogeneity of disease. One is through looking at the symptoms and clusters of symptoms that patients share. And that has led to groups investigating, respiratory long COVID, neurological long COVID, pain long COVID, and many other sort of um, subsets that can be defined. These are not clear cut subsets, by the way. It's that people, often report some of these symptoms together, but not always. So that's one way to kind of subdivide the disease for diagnosis and treatment. The way we are trying to do this is through biological analyses. And for instance, we were very much interested in the root causes of these diseases, because if we can understand and treat the root cause, we should be able to cure diseases, right? That's sort of the definition of root causes. So that could involve things like persistent virus that we talked about. If we can get rid of all the replicating virus, can we restore health? Autoimmune diseases, if that's elicited, can we block the effector function of these, autoreactive antibodies or T cells? If there's inflammation going on, can we treat that with anti-inflammatory agents? And the Epstein-Barr virus reactivation in some people, do we treat that with an antiviral? And if people have all of these, can we do a combination trial? And so I think that approaching the disease from the pathogenesis side of things, and by the way, like a lot of these patients with these features share a lot of symptoms. So unfortunately, symptoms alone, it's very difficult to subset the patients. But with these two approaches merged together, I have hope that one day we can diagnose patients as having, let's say 3 of the 4 drivers or 2, and appropriately design clinical trials to tackle those specific causative agents. And I think that's where we're going to finally get to a place where we can prescribe combination therapy to people who need each of these sort of treatments.
That perhaps dovetails into, why did I win the lottery ticket for long COVID, where someone may have an instance of COVID and not necessarily develop long COVID?
Yeah, that is one of the most key questions that we're very interested in understanding. Um, Likely involves many factors. One is obviously genetics. So, there are a couple of studies that are looking at gene loci that are associated with higher risk for long COVID. And so there may be genetic link to someone who are more prone to developing long COVID versus not. There's also, as I mentioned, the female sex is a risk factor. And that likely involves sex hormones, deficiencies in sex hormones. We found, for instance, female patients with long COVID have lower levels of testosterone. And that testosterone reduction was one of the top predictors of long COVID disease. And so, it could involve things like the status of the sex hormones. Obviously, age might also impact these sex hormones, and a person's hidden sort of predisposition to certain diseases, autoimmune diseases, or whatnot, might also impact whether a person develops long COVID or not. But the answer to your question is currently not known, and it's a really important question because we want to prevent long COVID from happening in people. And to do that, it would be great to identify those who are at risk. So we can specifically target those people and say, look, you need to do X, Y, and Z to prevent the disease.
Right. And in my case, because I've heard, I think, in one of your articles or in the industry that having autoimmune issues prior to an instance of COVID. In my case, I had Sjogren's. I've also got ankylosing spondylitis, which is a autoimmune disease and a form of arthritis. I also had EBV in my system, so I think some of the cards are stacked against me in my case.
Yeah, and I think I wanted to mention it's interesting because we're biologically related, obviously, with my dad, and I unfortunately had COVID a few years ago, but I myself, who is related to my father, and as a woman, I don't have any long COVID symptoms, and so it is very puzzling as to why my dad was affected. But is also just, yeah, it's a huge question mark. And I'm so glad that, that's something that you're working to answer as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nikki, that brings an important clarification that I should make, which is that these genetic links are increases the risk very, very small percentage.
Mm.
So it's not like, you're bound to get long COVID if your father has long COVID. Not at all. This is just a small risk that is increased. And it doesn't mean that if you have those genes that you're going to develop long COVID. So I just want to clarify that it's not like a one-to-one.
For sure. Yeah, I appreciate that clarification. But yeah, my dad and I have talked about that a bit. So I wanted to
Yeah.
mention that.
Yes, definitely.
Great. So you've mentioned ME/CFS, and there's a lot of debate, let's call it. I happen to be ME/CFS friendly, and that it those are people similarly affected. Is How do you separate ME/CFS? Because I reading of some people that get long COVID that develop ME/CFS, or some people only have ME/CFS. How do you make the distinction between ME/CFS and long COVID? And are there uh, research lessons that can be learned, or
Mhm.
take advantage of research in one area that helps the other?
Yeah, that's also another very important question that we are tackling in our team. Um, there's a lot of overlap between people who develop long COVID who then develop ME/CFS. And there are, estimated to be 65 million people prior to COVID who were living with ME/CFS. So, clearly other triggers. Infection is thought to account for about 70% of trigger for ME/CFS, but there are other triggers, trauma and toxin and other stimuli can also develop into ME/CFS. So we are currently considering these things as very related conditions, but we don't know what the overlaps are and what the distinctions are for, again, biologically. So we're currently comparing patients who have long COVID versus ME/CFS and are finding overlapping immune signatures, but also some distinct ones that are not shared. So I think more research is needed to answer your question, but we're getting closer and closer to the to better understanding that difference.
It is frustrating. Illness is frustrating. It's frustrating that we. It does feel like we're on the precipice of perhaps some therapeutics or treatment. Um, it is frustrating for a lot of long COVID patients. It still seems like we're in the identification phase, if you will. Um, but I'm encouraged with. It just seems like there's a lot of trials that are coming up, and we'll end later on with that. There's more of a commentary. It's frustrating, but I think we're hopefully on the verge of some answers. And I've certainly been active in my advocacy on social platforms. Um, I participated in Dr. Van Elzeker's uh, uh, PET MRI brain scan looking at neurological impact. That was at the Martinos Imaging Lab in the Boston area. So I think patients, have a great responsibility to, do their part. Hard to do trials without patients with long COVID.
Yeah, in fact, it's the other way. I learned so much from the patients that it's impossible to do research without the patients.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, so as I mentioned, I drew the long straw or the short straw, the straw you don't want, and then I've got both long COVID and cancer. I know in dating back to November 2023, you were quoted in a Fortune magazine article, and at that time, it was hard to draw. There was speculation that there was
Mhm.
correlation between people that COVID that develop cancer. it seems that there's even in the last month and a half, I've seen a number of studies that are starting to come out. Eye cancer, okay, how SARS-CoV-2 can affect lung cancer and throat cancer. Um, in my case, my oncologist said that he felt that my depleted immune system either caused or exacerbated my stage 4 cancer. I personally don't think we're quite there yet to draw the correlation. You hear talks about turbo cancer, but can you speak to, that topic? I don't expect answers. I don't expect a cure. But what's your views on, of long COVID and cancer? Or-
Yeah, thank you. So I think in that original article that you mentioned, I speculated a few different ways in which a virus like SARS-CoV-2 can lead to cancer. One of them had to do with, potential viral proteins that could be oncogenic. And there are some reports of NSP15, for example, having some, oncogenic or anti-tumor suppressor properties. And there's also a possibility that if there's chronic inflammation that's happening, um, you could develop cancer as a result of that. And we know that in some people, SARS-CoV-2 become persistent and replicating, and that induces inflammation that can then lead to damage in the surrounding cells that can then result in cancer. And also, as you mentioned, immune suppression as a result of having long COVID could also enable these dormant cancers to proliferate and become metastatic. And so there are many different ways in which infections can trigger or promote cancer cells in the body. And as you mentioned, in the last few months, there have been several studies that are, very strong studies that are indicating that infections like SARS-CoV-2 or influenza can reawaken the dormant cancer cells that are dissipated throughout the body. And that's holed up in, two different large biobank studies. So I feel that now there's more and more evidence for the link between the infection and cancer, and even potentially molecular and cellular mechanisms being elucidated. So, at the time when I spoke with the reporter about this, I wasn't really sure what to say. But now I think my tone is a little bit different. That yes, now there's some evidence that these events are linked, and what we need to do is to study what the link is to be able to prevent and treat these cancers that happen after the infection.
Yeah, it's to be determined. I have my theories. I don't believe that I would have cancer if I didn't have long COVID. But that's why there's the patient and research community. So hopefully there'll be continued focus on that, and we'll be able to find some answers. If
Yeah,
anything, not for me, but for the people down the road. I mean, that's
and
kind of the way I look at it.
And I also want to take this moment to thank you, Ty, for speaking up about this link. I've actually been following you on Twitter and really enjoy your posts with Nikki and your wife and the dog. But I do learn a lot from what you are saying out there. And the link, I didn't dismiss this link immediately because of people like you speaking up about the possibility. And that's how it starts, right? The research starts because we're learning from what's going on. And so I do thank you for your advocacy.
Well, that's sincerely appreciated. Um, you hear the term turbo cancers, and that is a great segue into my next area of questions, because online can be brutal, and I try and avoid the trolls. But 90% of them come back and say it was the jab. You don't, long COVID's not a thing. You know, you've got cancer because you were vaccinated. Um, can you speak to, because I know that's an area of expertise and focus. I don't regret getting the vaccine. I had elderly parents. One of my two parents got COVID and survived it. I don't think he would have survived it had it not been for the vaccine. So, I happen to be in a pro vaccine space, but I also believe it's a personal choice.
Mhm.
Um, can you speak to vaccines and the safety and efficacy, but then also maybe the second part of that question is vaccine injury versus long COVID or
Mhm.
post vaccine syndrome, I think as you call it.
Right, exactly. So, yeah, so I'm an immunologist. My lab works on vaccine development, and our approach is to elicit mucosal immune responses so that we can stop the virus, before it even enters our body within the nose and the oral cavity. So, vaccine is something that's very close to what we do, and um, part of the reason I am an immunologist is because of my desire to develop safe and effective vaccines. And it's also important to note that vaccination is one of the you know few things that one can do to prevent the risk for long COVID as well. So vaccinations and the doses of vaccines have been shown to reduce the risk for developing long COVID. um, and of course, severe COVID, hospitalized COVID, and death from COVID can be prevented with vaccination, especially in the high risk individuals. And so I think it's very important to keep up with the vaccines and to also, prevent long COVID. It's not a perfect prevention mechanism, but it's definitely better than not having it. Uh, Another thing that's interesting, recently there was a very important paper that was published from the MD Anderson group, where they showed that COVID mRNA vaccines given prior to immune checkpoint blockade, this is the immunotherapy against cancer, had a pretty significant impact on the survival of patients that are then later treated with the checkpoint inhibitor therapy. So it has this sort of unknown, until now, unknown effect of boosting the immune response even against the cancer. So I think there's a lot of great things that are coming up with or becoming revealed about the COVID vaccines. But
Excuse me, Akiko, is that mRNA you're referring to?
yes,
Okay.
mRNA. Yeah.
Yes.
Um, However, on the other hand, there are rare sort of individuals who suffer from long COVID-like illness after the vaccination, and those are the people we are calling post-vaccination syndrome, because we don't really know what triggers these conditions, but it happens to impact people within the first day to first week of getting the vaccine, either the primary series or the booster, that people then develop conditions that are very related to long COVID in terms of symptoms. So these post-vaccination syndrome, currently it's not even recognized by health authorities. But we have heard from enough people who are suffering from these conditions that we decided to investigate, and we applied the same set of technologies and tools that we have for long COVID to study post-vaccination syndrome. And there are some interesting overlap between these two conditions. For instance, we find Epstein-Barr virus reactivation in both of these settings, as well as spike protein in the blood of patients in both conditions. We're not saying that these things are driving the disease, but there are some similarities in biomarkers. And so But it's also very inappropriate and wrong to now say that all long COVID is post vaccination. That type of misinformation is out there, and I'm trying to combat that, but it's very difficult because they're just so numerous. I just wanted to, let your audience know that these are two separate conditions, and we don't really know what triggers the post-vaccination syndrome, but it's something that we should understand better so that we can make the vaccines even safer in the future.
Um, and the particular study you mentioned, was it treatment for which particular type of cancer? Because I know I also have read about mRNA potential for treating cervical cancer.
Yes. So the cancer study that I mentioned, it was basically looking at populations of cancer patients who got the mRNA COVID vaccine or who didn't, and then went on to get the immunotherapy, which is the
Mhm.
anti PD-1 or anti PDL-1 checkpoint blockade therapy. And interestingly, people who have gotten the COVID vaccine prior to the checkpoint inhibitor did better than those who didn't get the mRNA vaccine. And that was in melanoma and lung cancer. But
Gotcha.
you know, there may be other cancers that are being studied now. I don't know about, but those are the two cancers that they study.
Yeah, it's rather ironic that, especially from the trolls or the critics that or the anti-vaxxers, that then we're starting to see where some vaccines can actually help treat cancer. Uh, so I don't know if that's a Greek paradox or what. Um, the other study that I saw in even the last couple of days, relating to vax damage, there was a massive Danish study of 1 million children, that found zero link between aluminum and childhood vaccines, and 50 health conditions, including autism. So
Mhm.
I know that's a whole other area of a current focus of the administration is, um, what, linking vaccines to diseases, but there's plenty of studies that find the contrary.
Absolutely. And I think that, people tend to forget the benefit of childhood vaccines until things like the measles outbreak and, things that used to be controlled because of
Right,
vaccination is now coming coming back, which is really sad because these are all preventable.
right. So um, I want to circle back to, not politics, but you were a part of the round table, the HHS long COVID
Mhm.
roundtable recently. They had a morning and afternoon session, and it was a bit of a who's who. And of course, you were there. Um, I was quite thrilled to see it happen. But as much as you can talk about, is there any follow up to that? It just seemed like there was, yeah, this is important. We should look at it, but I haven't seen funding. I haven't seen, a reformation of a long COVID, council or within HHS. Um, is there anything you can speak to there, or will there be future roundtables?
I hope so. At the roundtable that I participated, there were talks about future roundtable for chronic Lyme, as well as potentially involving industry partners uh, and to discuss potential therapeutics and clinical trials. So I really hope that happens. Unfortunately, shortly after that, the government shut down. So, you know,
Right.
I think there may have been something going on, but I haven't heard yet.
Yeah, your invite hasn't shown up in the mail.
One step forward, two steps back. It
Yeah.
appears.
Um, no, as I the recover study within HHS has received a lot of criticism, and I was one of those critics. In
Mhm.
that they had $1 billion, and I believe half of that was spent on observation
Mhm.
and as RFK Jr. mentioned in the roundtable, didn't yield anything. So it has a bit of a black eye. Um, so, drawing from my my sales and business experience, I'm like, well, instead of complaining about it, be a part of the solution. So I'm a patient rep this year. Um, I am part of a study that I can't speak about it yet because it is going through review on the government shutdown. Our data source was shut down right at the tail end of that. So we're hoping that that paper can be produced. So um, that goes back to that, start of this conversation where, it takes a village, more than a village.
Mm.
Um, I believe the government, we're the richest nation in the world. It is frustrating that we've had the cuts that we've had. So that's why I get on
Mhm.
my soapbox and sometimes scream into the void. Anyway, I digress. Um, I wanted to end with now that we've depressed our audience with how horrible this thing is and how we don't have therapeutics. Um, can you spend a few minutes there? It does seem like there's a lot of trials. There's the Zepbound Scripps trial that's happening. Recover's got a number of, or I think 4 trials going on. Can you speak to that landscape and what trials you may be involved with, or ones that you're wanting to kick off? Um, because as we continue to beat the dead horse, this is affects tens of millions of people. It grossly affects the economy. You think of tens of millions of Americans out of work. That affects the economy. So maybe we can end with maybe some hope of what trials do you have an eye on, or perhaps engaged in yourself. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think you're right. There are lots of large clinical trials that are happening or is about to happen that I'm very excited about. Um, not because I don't think any single drug will cure everyone, but if we can find biological signature of responsiveness in each of these trials, I think that is a huge win because then we can understand which population will benefit from a particular drug and future trial can be focused on those patients. Number one. Number two, it really tells us about the underlying mechanism of disease, for which there may even be a better therapeutics available. So I'm involved in a couple of different trials. A couple of them with Dr. David Petrino. He's one of your heroes. So
He's
it's
one of my heroes, absolutely.
exactly.
And Amy
So
Proel. Amy Proel
exactly.
is
Amy
doing some
Proaldos,
amazing work at Polybio.
absolutely. Amy is also my hero too, and so is David. Um, we are doing a clinical trial with the low dose rapamycin, and that's something that some patients have benefited from, but we don't know what the effects are again, and who will benefit from that type of treatment. So we're doing a randomized clinical trial with the low dose rapamycin, and there's also another trial that David Petrino and our team are doing together, which is the Truvada Moraviroc trial. These are
Yes.
these are antivirals that are used for HIV. But interestingly, the Truvada, for instance, has a pretty strong antiviral effect on Epstein-Barr virus. So we're trying to see if that treatment benefits those with EBV reactivation, and again, see if we can find a biomarker for responsiveness. I'm also involved in a clinical trial with the JAK inhibitor. This is a anti-inflammatory agent that is being led by Dr. Wes Ely. I think he's also one of your heroes
Yes, he sure is.
at Vanderbilt. Um, anyway, I get to work with these heroes, which is such a privilege. Um, so he's leading a large trial, multi-center trial using JAK inhibitor. And again, we will have access to samples before and after, so we can correlate what changes are leading to the improvement. And then there's a trial that we want to do, which is actually several of us are getting together with the Invivid, which is biotech
Right.
company that make monoclonal antibodies against the spike protein. And they have a next generation monoclonal antibody that they're interested in trying in long COVID patients, as well as potentially post-vaccination syndrome patients who have spike levels, to see whether spike is really causative of the disease. And so that's a trial that we'd love to be able to run maybe next year, but something that is being discussed right now.
Right. So, Nikki, there's hope.
That is what I was just going to jump in and say. And also thinking back to like when we were in the thick of COVID and dad was experiencing all of these insane symptoms like the fever for 100 days, just as a small example. Like the fact that we are to a point where, the patients are being acknowledged and there is hope and that we're proceeding with trials, there is funding. And then just like the affirmation from you that like, yes, long COVID is real. Like we've come a long way in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely have a glasses half full versus half empty type of outlook. So I'm just glad to hear that there's discussions being had and just acknowledgement. And yeah, I thank you so much for also just following my dad on Twitter and, being mindful of his patient experience. And as you said, there can be no studies and research without the patient. So I just makes me really happy to hear that from you. And I know my dad is thrilled over there, even though he's not.
Well, I was going to say I'm fangirling, but I think that I'll stick with that.
You're fangirling on the inside really hard.
Yes. Hard to contain myself.
Oh, thank you.
So Akiko, we do have so part of the mantra of Butterfly Pavilion, and there's a whole story of the Butterfly Pavilion you'll hear in the first episode, but we try and find light in darkness because there is a lot of darkness in long COVID and in stage 4 cancer. And part of that is, and you'll have to indulge us, we're going to end with movie quotes. So this is completely left field. This is the first time you've done this. Movies are part of my inspiration for a lot of my parody videos. And I have something in each episode where I try and stump Nikki with a movie quote. These are around what I would say the gaslighters. So this is an easy one. I'm going to give you 2 quotes and you both have an opportunity to guess the answer. First one is, "You stink. You smell like beef and cheese. You don't smell like Santa." Second, "He's an angry elf."
Well, Dad, are these quotes from the same
movie, Nikki?
Okay, I think it's Elf.
It is. Ding, ding, ding. Ding, ding, ding. You're a winner. Well, I gave you an easy one because once again, I gave you the name of the movie and one of the quotes. But Nikki, thank you so much. Akiko, I can't thank you enough. Anything you want to say before we hit the end button?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you both for having me on your show, and I hope what you're doing is so important to find light in darkness. And I think that also goes for researchers like myself. It's really difficult to be studying these diseases, especially when there's so much darkness around. And I find personally light in speaking with patients and their family members. And this has been such a wonderful part of my day today. So thank you so much.
Well, Nikki.
Oh, no, thank you.
You want to wrap it up?
Yeah, no, we appreciate you so much. It's been wonderful speaking with you today. And yeah, thanks so much. We're excited to get this episode out.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And happy holidays to you, Akiko, to you and your 2 girls. And we will post this to TikTok. even though your girls said that you're not allowed on TikTok.
Exactly. I'll let them know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank
Fantastic.
you. Take care.